Welcome, Sue.
Thank you, Dave.
Welcome. And congratulations on passing the finishing line for your 5th book.
Well, I'm not quite past the finish
Not
line
quite.
yet, but I'm really, really close.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
And how's that experience been for you? Like, how are you feeling now? Is it a combination of horror, exhaustion, elation, or a combination of all of those sorts of things?
Well, it's a bit of a challenge, really, because the reality is I don't know when to stop. And you have to have a deadline for things because otherwise you'll just keep editing and changing and updating. And because the book's on LinkedIn and there's been so many changes over the last 2 years, it is really hard to work out, when do you call time on it.
Sure. Over the last 2 years and almost fortnightly, there's somebody writing about another subtlety with voice coming in and
That's right.
the ability to do those sorts of funky things.
Yeah, and this particular book is both strategy and tactics, whereas my first LinkedIn book was more just strategy. There were tactics in it, but this one's really tactical. So, yeah, by the time I get it printed, I'll need to do another one probably.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so tactical sounds nice. So that's something that people can actually. It's a book that they can buy and do things
Correct.
to. That's the sort of non-fiction reading that I really love to do as well.
Yeah.
Winding back a bit further, like what possessed Sue to start writing? Where have these 5 books come from, and what inspired you to write in the first place?
Yeah, well, I first started online publishing back in 2001 with my first website. And obviously when you produce a website, you're producing a lot of content. So you just end up with more and more and more. And then as I approached the age of 50, I thought, well, are people still going to want an 80-year-old LinkedIn specialist talking to them? Possibly not. So maybe I should think about what my future career would be. Okay. And I figured that you could be a writer at any age. And I love writing. And so I made that decision to publish those 3 80,000-word books in my 50th year, which I did in 8 months. That was crazy. And I remember doing an audio interview after the second one, and I was just about asleep in it. But anyway, I did that, and then, it took a couple more years before I did my 4th, and now this is my 5th. So the goal is to have 10 books by 2026, which will be 10 years from the first.
Wow, that's quite a goal. Okay, I don't know. I suppose there was part of me kind of half expecting the kind of, woke up at 3 a.m. one morning in a cold sweat because I had my first inspiration for it's something a lot more practical than that. So it's something that you can sort of set some goals around and plan into. So that's an important part of your experience as a writer.
It is, and also as a career development practitioner, and as a business owner, you've always got to be thinking about what's your next move. And so, that's definitely a part of it as well.
Okay. We're all perhaps wondering, what the publishing journey is like. I mean, we've got the inspiration, the writing, the planning, the discipline of actually writing those books. But how do you choose? I mean, on the one hand, we've got the $10,000 advance from Penguin or Simon and Schuster, or I've written a great textbook. It's going to be picked up by Pearson's and published in all secondary schools. Versus, this thing is going to cost me, $15,000 to do it all by myself. Or is there, where are you in that big continuum of things? What did you decide to do? And what do you think are the differences?
Well, look, the reality is I did a lot of research before I set up my first website. So I did the same thing with writing. And I'm a bit of a control freak and I like to be in charge. So the reality is I wasn't going to be able to work with a traditional publisher because they have requirements, and I did a lot of research to investigate what would happen and who would have the rights and who would have control. And then when I was writing the first book, I got editors in and they kept changing my voice. And I thought, well, I can't have that either.
Right.
And so I hired an author advisor, Ewan Mitchell, and he told me what to do. So I classify myself as independently published as opposed to self-published because I used Ewan, I had a graphic designer, I had some editing help.
Lots of skills you've drawn upon to put the project together. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm still, chief cook and bottle washer.
Yeah, gotcha. So maintaining a degree of so that guidance and your voice has been an important part of it for you.
It is. And it's really interesting because anybody who's seen me speak or knows me says they can hear my voice in my words. And that's exactly what I wanted to achieve. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, your voice and your words. Now, on that, just to segue onto that subject of voice, I know that you don't just write about business and about the internet and and about online presence and all of those sorts of things. Although, you know, I know you via some of those skills, but I hadn't realised until recently that you were also a poet. And when we're talking about voice and hearing, you know, to me, that's, you know, poetry is almost the music of writing in a way. You know, what inspires you to write poetry?
Well, that's a really good question because it's not traditional. So in year 9 at high school, I did French, and the French teacher asked us to convert a poem either from French to English or English to French. I can't remember which, but I've managed to find it, so it's on my website. And she said I was really good at it. And I sort of buried that, but it was always in the back of my mind, that sort of memory. Now, when I wrote my first book, I was listening to Spotify at the time, and there was this great ad from Victoria University, and I loved it, and I got their permission to use it in the book. And then I thought, okay, well, I can write other things. And so then I started putting more poetry. So I had another poem at the beginning of the second book, and then a poem in the third book. And by the time I got to the fourth book, I had a poem in every chapter. So, it's built up from there. So now I've developed the idea that my next 2 books after the LinkedIn book will be poems for lovers to read to each other and poems for me to truly be. So the idea there being that I want people to get together and away from a screen and be talking to one another and be a catalyst for conversation.
Lovely.
And then for those people who don't have a partner, then or even if they do, they can still look inside themselves and say, you know, how do I want to live this life? So, yeah, I've got a whole range of poems that I do around that.
Oh, that's nice. It's a really nice way of thinking of poetry as well, because my question was kind of going in the direction of I was wondering whether that had made Sue consider the voice of poetry being an important thing. You know, it's about meter, it's about rhythm, and there is and rhyme. That I was thinking maybe you're heading down the audiobook path, maybe the audiobook path for your books, but it sounds like more so you've actually written the poetry from the eyes of the other, from the eyes of the reader,
correct,
rather than from the writer, which is an important skill, I think, not just for poets but for writers in general. Would you say? Is that something you enjoy? You enjoy writing that's more done, which is oriented toward the reader's experience rather than the writer?
For me, it's always about the reader. I'm always imagining what I could share that could be of value to a reader. And so I try and provide insights. The word that a lot of people say about my writing is it's insightful. So I really think quite deeply. And then sometimes I think quite frivolously. And I think of something just funny. Like I remember I was at a client's house and she had this book called The Art of Stillness. But I saw it as the art of silliness. Yeah, I don't know why. And so I thought, I'll write a poem about the art of silliness. So I get really abstract ideas and then off I go. But my poem is a lot of rhyming. I try and make it as accessible as possible. I'm not sort of some highfalutin creative that you've got to try and interpret some fantastical meaning from it. I'm not that type of poet. I'm sort of, I'd like to say an accessible poet, which comes away, people read it and they think, oh, okay, yeah, I get it.
That touches me somewhere. That relates somehow to my own experience of the situation. I know you wrote at least one quite beautiful one when the Queen had died.
Yes.
There was one of those that caught my eye, and I thought, yeah, and I agree with you. That was the sort of feeling it gave me, is that Sue's going, yes, that's sort of it. That's close to the kind of impression that I have of all of this. I mean, on the one hand, it's a huge big monarch, and maybe we don't particularly want to support these huge, old, antiquated, expensive structures, but, you know, she spent a lot of time doing a lot of good and really under extraordinary pressures.
Absolutely.
Also, and to acknowledge that, you know, a life is never just about one thing, it's about many, many things.
Although one thing the Queen did have was a lot of support. And I think that's what a lot of people forget. They think that they have to do everything on their own.
Okay,
and so I kind of wanted to get that point across as well.
Nice.
And yes, but she had made a 70-year commitment, which is very honourable.
Indeed. Now, just wondering a little bit, we've sort of covered publishing and inspiration for writing, and I am curious also about the sales and marketing part of books, Sue. So one of the reasons that you and I when we first bumped into each other is that I'd started an audiobook business, and Sue had very graciously offered me help to get my ducks all lined up for things like Google and how does Google find you and how should you structure this, and introduced me to the idea of SEO and keywords and consistency and just the benefit of being seen to be published a lot and writing a lot. So how do we put all of what you've learnt along that journey, Sue, at the service of authors?
Look, I'll tell you the story. So basically, before I started writing the 3 books, I had $26,000 in the bank. By the end of the year, there was no $26,000 because I went to careers expos and I paid for all this promotion. I did all these crazy things. And then you and Mitchell told me that it takes about $15,000 a book to write a book. And I thought, oh, okay, so I did it in less than 30,000, so well done. But when I think about, the problem was I was so exhausted and I still had a business to run, so I didn't promote the books. So I think what you've got to ask yourself when you write a book, the process for me was cathartic. All that knowledge I had came out into the books.
Tremendous.
So it was a fantastic experience, and that's what we should celebrate with writing. It's not just about making money from book sales, but what it has done is it's given me a lot more credibility. So a lot of people say a book is thud value. So when you go into a meeting, you put down your book and it goes thud, and it just gives you that who cares if nobody reads it kind of thing, just the fact that you've gone through that process has been very beneficial. So my income...
And that something has a kind of universal regard, you're kind of suggesting, I think, that... And I feel that way as well. I mean, it does feel a bit different if you're referring to, someone is referring to themselves or being referred to you as an author, then it's kind of, oh, you've written a book. Like, it's...
Yeah, and it's a commitment. And I was also a judge in the Career Book Awards, and then I read other books, and you could tell the journalists, their writing was fabulous, and you could tell the other people whose writing was, let's say, different. And so, the whole experience is, I think, what you have to look at. But this time around, by the time I get to the 10th book, then I'm thinking by then I might be able to make money from the actual books. So I very much play the long game. So I think a lot of people assume, oh, well, I'll do this and I'll make millions. And, you listen to ads and YouTube videos and you think, oh, I can just make it happen. It doesn't always.
You're not the first one that I've heard that from, Sue, actually. That very phrase, that really authors don't know whether they've become authors until they have written about 10 books. And you sort of thinking, really, it nearly killed me writing the first one.
Yes.
But, it's a long, as you say, it's a long game.
Yeah. Well, my grandmother lived to 98 and I want to get to 100. So I got plenty of years to write books.
Well, and what are you now, the next question, of course, is what are you going to do with all those huge number of remaining years? Like where's your writing journey going to take you next, do you think?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. I did a songwriting workshop, so I'm really interested to see how you can convert poems into songs. So who knows? I've done video workshops. I did my university studies by correspondence, and then when I finished my degree, I just continued learning. So I go to up to 4 events every week. So who knows what the future is? There'll be other applications in the future. There won't just be books. I do a lot of short form content as well. So so long as I'm sharing information and helping people connect, they're kind of my 2 missions in life.
Oh, fantastic, Sue. Yeah. That's really gorgeous. And certainly from my point of view, you've been an inspiration to me and in my work.
Thank you.
And I'm sure I'm one of lots and lots of others. And perhaps just as a parting subject, I know that you mentioned earlier about perhaps not doing a lot to market and promote your earlier pieces, but that's starting to change now. One thing I have noticed myself about changes for you is that you've started to get a few television appearances.
Yes.
So what's the relationship between authors, marketing, media, or how did all that media stuff come about? And do you think that's something that anyone can do, or?
Yeah, look, a good question. I've met a lot of authors and all they want to do is write. They don't want to do the marketing. They want to leave all that to somebody else.
Just leave me out of it.
Yes, I just want to stay in my attic and, write.
Okay.
But unfortunately, you're the writer and you have to promote it. So either whether you're traditionally published or independently or self-published, you're still going to have to do that work. So as an educator, I always look at how can I share the message. So whether it's a book, whether it's television, whether it's quoted in an article, I don't mind. the way I got the television gig was not through some PR person. It was actually through being published in the Daily Mail website. And then the producer saw me as the interviewee and called me in, and, now I've had 3 spots. But it was really interesting because when I was at Hair and Makeup today,
As you do.
As one
does.
And I'm just the long game, and I think too many people say if there's not a return on investment, then I won't do it. Whereas you've got to be a little bit more open-minded than that and just say, if you're on your path, you're educating, you're connecting people, then who cares? Do these things along the way, enjoy the experience, sit back and relax.
Well done, Sue Ellson, because I think there's a lovely paying it forward in that attitude as well.
Thank you.
That those things, they tend to come around, but karma's a beautiful thing, but it doesn't have an exchange rate. You'll just put it out there and it'll come back and you'll go, wow, I wonder what brought that on. And it's probably been just the accumulation of all those lovely things you've done. So.
Yeah. Look, the only thing I would say to people is please document everything. Keep a record, update your website. Every time this sort of stuff happens, you've got to share it. And
I think that's true. The whole backstory. And I remember us talking earlier about the idea of journaling or I've never been able to keep a diary, but I do love things like email, and I love documenting my story with friends as I go along. Yeah. So it's kind of so blogging and talking to community about what's going on. That's kind of an extension of that process. So
look, I think the only thing you have control over is your own website. So at the end of the day, if you can keep as much of a record on your own website as you go along, that's the goal.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that's
Thanks,
really
Dave.
great. Thank you very much. Thank you.